Good evening, Swamiji.
Namaste. Good evening.
Namaste. My name is Faridoon Shahryar. I'm an entertainment journalist, but I have all sorts of other interests as well. I write poetry, and I like to read about almost anything and everything. So Swami Vivekanand ji was someone that I've been extremely fascinated by. My mother is a professor in English. She has quoted Swami Vivekanand ji in her research. In her PhD, she has quoted Swami Vivekanand ji, and the fact that he was there in 1893 in Chicago at the Parliament of Religions, that is as it is famously called as, and the entire concept of Hinduism was introduced to the world in the biggest possible way. What do you personally feel has been the biggest contribution of Swami Vivekanand ji?
Swami Vivekananda, first contribution obviously was to give a different light on the East in general. And a lot of work has been done in this aspect. So before Swamiji, there had been exchanges between the East and the West, but it was the Parliament of World's Religion, at the World's Parliament of Religion in Chicago, which started on 11th September 1893, which was slated to be a forum where the Christian religion will be showcased or shown as the superior religion, the best religion in the world. And as history has shown us, as luck would have it, it turned out quite the other way. People came to know about different religious traditions from the East, particularly. And because the West had never come across these ideas, so that was a big revolution. So Swamiji's main contribution, if one has to say, was to present East in general and India in particular. Because Swamiji was invited to many talks, some parlor talks, some formal talks, where he had to face questions about Indian culture. So it was not just about Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma, but it was in general about Indian culture. People had so many fantastic notions about India. And that is where he presented a person with a modern education, at the same time a person who has allegiance or belonging to an ancient order of monks. So that kind of a combination, which is a unique kind of combination. Now you find so many people, but at that time, Swamiji was unique in that sense. And so that was his main contribution. And the second contribution was, nowadays we hear everywhere, dialogue among religions, interfaith this, interfaith that, interreligious dialogue, etc. But in reality, this thing was started by Swami Vivekananda. Because when Swami Vivekananda presented his paper on Hinduism on 19 September 1893 in the Parliament of Religion, he talks about a universal religion. And he says, I don't want any Christian to become a Hindu. I don't want any Hindu to become a Christian or a Christian to become a Buddhist, like that. I want people to follow their religion, whatever they are comfortable with. But I am envisioning a universal religion which will accept all religious ideas. So this idea, which we have not yet worked on till now, even in 2020, this idea of universal religion, where people will be accepted as they are, with all their beliefs, dogmatic or otherwise, and they will be accepted. So this idea of dialogue was started by Swami Vivekananda. So I think these two things are, and the first thing also presenting the Eastern aspect of things was also in many ways a dialogue, where you dialogue about culture, about family values, about food habits. So that was something Swamiji did. That was his singular contribution. And that's why across the world, everyone has no problem in accepting Swami Vivekananda as a role model or an icon.
Exactly. And I think people have given the reference of his address at the World Parliament of Religions all across the world in so many books and so many luminaries. They have given references to what Swami Vivekananda said. And at the same time, he also introduced yoga to the world.
Yeah. Yeah, but he introduced yoga, but what he introduced was not so much the physical yoga. He introduced the spiritual kind of yoga. There are two branches, you might be aware. One, the physical one is called the Hatha Yoga, and the spiritual kind of thing is called the Raja Yoga, where you do meditation, you try to control your mind, bring your mind into your control, harness the power of your mind. So Swamiji, what he did was he introduced that to the world. It was not so much for the physical part of it. The physical yoga, we all know very well, was introduced much later or popularized much later by people like B.K. Iyengar, etc. So before that, that part of yoga was not popular. Swamiji popularized the meditation part of yoga. And
Right.
that was very important in those days. And many
Of course.
who were very popular, very famous, also took to practicing meditation under Swamiji's guidance.
So, Swamiji, a very interesting part about Swami Vivekananda's life was that I believe he passed away at the age of 39. So he was extremely young when he passed away. And in spite of the fact that he spent very few years in the world, the contribution that he has made has been phenomenal. Do you find that fascinating?
So the you see why the contribution in his own words, I'm paraphrasing Swami why the contribution was so significant. If you see, Swamiji's first public lecture was on 11th September 1883. Before that, he never spoke in the public. And when he spoke, he was 30 years, was his age. And he passed away a couple of months short of 40. So if you see, his life was, his active public life was uh, only a bit more than 9 years. So in that span, how can a person, we have his correspondence, but what we have some 800 odd letters, and we believe we know that an equal or more number of letters are not with us, means they have been lost. And similarly, his discourses, so many discourses were not recorded, not printed. So what we have now in 9 volumes in English is only a fraction of what he actually did. And so how can a person do? So Swamiji himself says, see, uh, we always experience this. Someone tells us something and it just strikes a chord within us. And we feel those words. That someone could be someone who is just, maybe we are traveling in metro and someone just passes by made a remark, but it touches us. And sometimes we sit in a classroom or we listen to some lecture and there are so many words but no impact. So Swamiji says that the lived wisdom, something which comes from your experience, no matter who says that, causes an impact. And he used to give us an example of his guru, his master, Sri Ramakrishna. He said that the person was not formally educated. So for all practical purposes, he was an illiterate. But that person influenced so many people. And he was not popular in his day also. He lived from 1836 to 1886, Sri Ramakrishna. And most of his life, he lived in a temple in Dakshineshwar in Kolkata. But that person, increasingly his message has been touching the minds of so many people across the world because what he spoke, he spoke from experience. His words were rooted in experience, in wisdom. So that is why Swamiji could do, because what he was speaking he was not just telling something so much of blah blah, etc. He was speaking from his realization. So those words mattered and they made an impact on whoever listened to those words. So this is the difference. And then they give the output. So you can put it in this way. I mean, some people say something because they have something to say. And most people say something because they have to say something. So So that is the
Exactly.
difference.
That's very well said. That is very well said. All right. So Swamiji, Swami Vivekananda, his name was Narendra. He experienced life way too early, and it is because of his experiences that he ended up becoming what he did. Because he also was by Ramakrishna ji when he was not well, so he took care of him, and he also toured the entire Indian subcontinent to get a first-hand feel of what India was all about. This is like 1880s I'm talking about. So he did gain a lot of experience.
That could be one reading of Swamiji's life, but we also know that since childhood he used to meditate, and when he used to go to sleep, he used to get himself submerged in a flood of light, and he thought that it was normal for everyone. Whoever used to go to sleep used to get oneself immersed in flood of light. Later on, when he met Sri Ramakrishna, then he said, do you experience this before you go to sleep? Do you feel that you are immersed in a flood of light? Then Narendranath Datta, which was his pre-monastic name, he said,
Yes.
yes, we do. Then he said, yes, that is why, because you are a perfect soul from birth, Nitya Siddha. So one reading could be what you said, but that is not uh, entirely factual, because Swami Vivekananda was not a person who had some kind of sorrow, and then his life took a turning point. The spiritual questioning was there since childhood. He always used to experiment with spirituality, and so that is why when he learned that a particular deity had married, so he gave up that deity and started worshipping another deity. That kind of an experimentation was already there, and that is how he goes to Sri Ramakrishna. When he goes to Sri Ramakrishna, his father was alive, and he goes to Sri Ramakrishna and asks him the question, "Have you seen God?" So it was the spiritual quest which drove him, not the agony of family life or the worldly misery. That came later. So the first question which he asked Sri Ramakrishna is, "Have you seen God?" And Sri Ramakrishna said, "Yes, I have seen God, and I have seen him much clearer than I see you, and I can also show God to you." So this is the question. So and later on, when his father passed away, of course he had to face problems, but that did not deter him from progressing in spirituality.
Okay. And how much of traveling impacted his wisdom? Because he traveled all across India. At the same time, he traveled to various other parts of the world. He went to Europe, he went to Japan, and obviously he was in US and Canada as well. So how much of the traveling that he did impacted his worldly wisdom and his spirituality?
Of course, travel increases wisdom in the sense of worldly wisdom, in the sense of data, in the sense of information. But one thing which is striking in Swami Vivekananda's life is that when he goes abroad, and we have to remember that this happened in 1893, and when he travels across India from 1886, that is after his master Guru's passing away in 1886, off and on he travels across India as a wandering monk. In Sanskrit we call it Parivrajaka, or in Hindi we call it Parivrajaka. Now, even while he was traveling across the length and breadth of India, and when he traveled abroad, at that time we should understand the society had deep-rooted, dogmas, beliefs, etc. But Swami Vivekananda never felt himself different from the other. So where did that come? It came from the realization of the unity of everything, which is there in the scriptures of all world religions. So first he realized that. That's why he could be at ease with a very poor man in the hut of the poor man. He could be at ease in a king's palace. It doesn't matter. And when he went abroad also, he could walk through slums abroad, and he could also go to the most exotic places. And it did not deter him. So that is the difference. When we travel, what do we do? we are charmed, by exotic, exquisite flavors, cuisine, etc. And when we have to go to not so prosperous dwellings, we are disturbed, we are kind of concerned. That did not happen to Swami Vivekananda. That's where it is different. So yes, as data information, he got a lot of information about different cultures, etc. But he had a realization which came to him uh, in his contemplation when he was alone, when he was under the tutelage of his master. And that kind of prepared him to go abroad. Otherwise, imagine a person who had never given a public lecture. Going in the first public lecture is in front of so many people in such an august place, august audience, learned audience. It's difficult. So even the practical aspect of that. So when
Right. Okay.
Coral talked about this thing, so I suggested this title, Are Our Stories Connected? Because there is a unity. If you see, if we talk about ourselves being belonging to the same species, then we are all human beings. But unfortunately, even with so much of technology and supposedly so much of knowledge, we don't understand that link. I'm not talking about spirituality or religion. Even on the basis of being human beings, we need to touch that link of being the same, of belonging to the same species. We don't talk about that. And I think that is the first link which Swami Vivekananda understood in his life. That essentially we are all human beings and also essentially we are divine beings. So that is very important. Shall I also ask questions?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Ardun, if I were to ask you,
Right.
um, what do you feel our stories are? I'm a philosopher and I am. So what I would ask is, for a philosopher, the bigger question is why. And so, Fardun, I would like to know, why do you need a story? Or why do you relate? Or why does anyone relate to a story?
Right. Okay. So, sir, I did this. I'll give you like a perspective on this. So, I did my postgraduate diploma in journalism from Times of India from Delhi, and while we were being taught by various senior journalists from all across India, so one thing that we were taught very early was that basically any form of journalism is revolving around five questions: how, when, why, where, and why. And so there are four H and one W. And in that, the most important question is why. So as you asked about the why factor, so I think ultimately it is everything boils down to why are why is everything connected? Why do we do what we do?
Mm.
And so to answer your question, so ultimately we definitely are related in one way or the other. It is uh, I personally feel it is all about mutual respect.
Mm.
So the moment you give respect, you get respect. So it is all about that. So, and it's not a matter. I think if we believe in equality, if we believe in respect, respecting other people, not merely people, but all lives around us, be it the plants, be it animals, be it almost anyone and everyone. The moment we start doing it, so we find a certain element of unity with the cosmos. There are certain aspects that fascinate me, even about meditation, for example. That is something that fascinates us as well. So, for example, we offer namaz, and that is also called. So, my mother had this book when I was growing up, and that namaz is the yoga of Islam.
Mm.
You are just trying to connect with a superior being and superior force. So I think in a way, both of us, we have the same purpose, we have the same goal. I've always believed in one thing, that so if I'm born to parents that I'm born to, I don't have a choice in that. I am born in a particular religion, so I don't really have a choice in that. the good qualities or the good sayings of other religions, other people, other human beings, and the world around me, and the countries that I visit, the cultures that they have. So what I imbibe into my life, and not really just curtail my growth by the fact that if I'm born into a particular religion, so I have to only follow those tenets, and I cannot imbibe other things from other religions or other people. Those winds, they should not impact me.
One thing I think is why we need stories, because um, how I look at that is that essentially we are all stories in one form or the other, and our stories are changing. Say 5 years hence, I would be a different story. Maybe 5 years ago, I was a different story. And while it is very good to say that or listen to that, we have to respect others, etc. But we do see sometimes it becomes difficult for us to respect others. Then this comes as a big relief that all I need to do is that I have to accept other people with different beliefs, different customs, different priorities in lives as different stories. And then I should have an ear for all those stories. Because even within a custom, even within a religion, even within a same family, you have different people who have all different stories. And then it is because I don't have the patience and the broadness to listen to their story that there is so much of rift within a family. Because whenever we talk about diversity, the first thing, the point is to take an egalitarian kind of approach. And we talk about like there are different cultures, so we should mix. But what we do see closer to ground is that within a family there is a lot of disagreement. So much of disagreement within a family, particularly now with this COVID. People are becoming mad. The whole family bound indoors. People are going haywire. They are unable to control their
Yeah.
tempers, etc. So where did that come from? You belong to the same family, you belong to the same culture. In many cases, most cases, you belong to the same religion. But then how do you explain? Because we don't have the patience to listen to the other person's story. And that is why I think it's very easy to relate to a story. And if we look at everyone as a story, and if we have the patience to read them, sometimes in between the lines, then I think life becomes very simpler and also very interesting, full of variety. But we don't. You see, the time we invest in watching a web series, we don't invest in studying a person, and it is true. So that is why, if you see any religious tradition, you will find that it has been developed around storytelling. There is a lot of storytelling in the form of myth, in the form of folklore, in the form of history, in the form of cultural practices. There is a lot of storytelling. And every time you approach a person, I will give you an example. I like to talk to people because I like to talk in general. So I was traveling in, there is a train, wonderful train, which leaves Kathgodam and goes to Delhi. It's called the Kathgodam Shatabdi. So I was traveling in the train, and a young boy, a young man who was studying in the ninth standard, I asked him, what do you think is the biggest problem of this country? And he said, anger. You see, that's the most unusual response. But anger, one would expect education or poverty, unemployment, blah, blah, blah. He said anger. He said, we don't have the patience to listen to the other person. This is exactly in his
Of
words.
course.
In his
Of
words.
course.
In his words. He said that we don't have the patience to listen to the other person, to understand the other person's story. Again, in his words. So I was so much fascinated that person, uh, average boy who is studying in the ninth standard, has so much insight into human behavior. So that's story. So what I think we are losing here is the most humane thing of listening to stories. So you have a, Fardeen, you have a story, I have a story, and our stories are changing. And that is why I like this. I don't know whether you have seen the book. It's called Katha Sarit Sagar. Uh, so it was written by a person, Soma Datta. So that is a story where there are thousand stories, actually 10,000 stories. So one story leads to another story, leads to another story, and then somewhere in between the book, then the story comes out. Like they go in the backward direction and goes to the first story. So actually, all the stories are interlinked. For example, the latest movie Thappad. Now it's something which all of us come across. It's something which all of us know. But the way it has been presented, the nuances which have been shown so subtly, very good portrayal, that story needs to be told.
No, no, I'm glad that you like the film. I'm really fond of the entire team. The director, I know him very well, Anubhav Sinha, and of course Tapsi as well.
So please
I've seen the
convey
film twice.
my congrats to him for having done a wonderful job.
No, I'll do that. I'll do that for sure. I'll do that for sure. So I think what you're saying is sir, is really pertinent. And as you said about the acceptance part of it.
Yeah.
So what really happens is that I think a lot of the problems in the world are that people want to prove that maybe they are right and the other person is wrong. And a lot of problems in a way happen because of that. So the moment you don't refute the other person's point of view and you accept it,
Yeah.
and you're willing to listen to it, even though you may be having a point of view which may be slightly different, but if you can accept his point of view at the outset, that you're willing to accept his point of view, and that is what I meant by mutual respect as well. That is what my definition of mutual respect is. That rather than starting with refuting someone's opinion or point of view or belief, if you can accept it and take the conversation forward, and the moment the mutual respect develops, then he or she can be more receptive to your ideas. He or she can be willing to also admit that maybe what I'm saying is not entirely right, and maybe it can happen in a certain other manner as well, the way maybe you are saying. So I think acceptance, I think, is something which is the key, because the moment we keep on resisting, that is, we keep on being islands in our own self. And the moment we are accepting,
there is a problem. An intrinsic problem is there. The moment you convert a story into philosophy or theology, there comes a conflict. You see, suppose somebody has a life, has some beliefs, and let that be a story. And just let us listen to that story. See, nobody says, I don't accept your story. That doesn't happen. We all the time come across awful movies, we come across bad books, but we read it, somehow we go through that. We have no problem with that. So what I'm saying is, the moment you convert a story into a belief, or you convert a story into a doctrine or philosophy, some standpoint, then there is conflict. There's bound to be conflict. So why do we need to do that? That's the question. Even if you see, as I told you, most of the religious texts are stories. If you take the Bible, it is full of stories. The Quran is full of stories.
Yeah, of course.
Torah is full of stories. Upanishads, full of stories. So why do we, the Buddhist text, Tripitaka, the Jataka tales, all actually tales, stories. So why do we need to convert them into some principles? We don't need to. So we are all living our stories.
Of course.
And so looking at that way, if you see it from that perspective, then at least to me it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's a story.
Okay. So considering that you've told me your fascination with Bollywood and the films, so you give me a few analogies that why you feel our stories are connected. What are the films that you saw and the characters that you saw? That
there are so many actually. So for example, recent Hasmukh.
Okay, you've seen the Netflix.
web series
Right.
Hasmukh. Now,
Right.
who would have thought that? See, actually, how I looked at it, humor always has sorrow in it. That's how I look at it. Because, and it's a fact, most of the people who spend their entire lives making other people laugh had very, very um, depraved lives. Means they had lives of penury, poverty. Uh, many people in the movies and other. So humor comes when you are kind of, and the best humor is when you can laugh at yourself. So humor kind of is born from suffering. It is born from misery, and that that web series so succinctly puts it. You see that every time he goes for stand up, he has to take one life. It's like before he brings laughter, he has to take one life. So every time you make somebody laugh, it's a lifetime's work in some way. So this is a story, and it is connected. His humor is connected because it is connected with so many people. It's actually the first. It starts as he starts killing people who are against him, who have tortured him. Then he starts killing people who are bad people in a general. So it's connected. Then there are movies, many movies you have seen. There are Rashomon types where you see the same scene in different ways. And there are inconclusive movies like the one made on Talwar. Uh, so it was based on a real incident, but then there is no conclusion. They give you three kind of endings. So then how do you look upon the particular event? You don't know, because actually that's what I'm saying. There is, we want our stories to be conclusive, but I think that's the problem. Why do we want our stories to be conclusive? Why don't we just let it be a story? That's all what it is. Because you see, at the end of the day, if you look at the worldly aspect of it, that is, if you look at the corporeal aspect of it, body, mind, etc., all this is going to pass. Nobody is going to be here forever. And so that kind of gives it a expiry date, a shelf life. So why do we insist that my story? Now when somebody reads Charles Dickens, now who reads Dickens unless it is there prescribed in your literature course? That is the point. So whole idea of story has changed. Now there is something called a short novel. Now there is something called a 1 second novel. There is something called a one, in Bengali literature, for example, there is something called Anugolpo. So it is one page, a small page, which is like 1/4 of a A5 paper sheet, and that is a story. So that's what we have done in the visual media. We have brought short films, and now people don't have patience to watch short films. So they want clips which can be forwarded in WhatsApp. So that will be some 30 seconds. Now, who am I to say that the 30-second story is any less profound than a 3-hour movie? Why am I insisting that if a movie should be classical, it should be 4 hours long? That's my point. So everything is connected. The connected in the sense, if you have a perspective, you're good to go. If you have a say, then you're good to go. Why should I say that? You see, what you say is different from what I say. Let us not even think about it. You have your say, I will have mine. So then the stories become connected, because at the end of the day, essentially we are talking about human experience. We are not talking about something which is not human. You are sitting, where are you now? In Mumbai?
Yeah.
You are in Mumbai, I am in the Himalayas. We are all talking about something, but everything underlining human experience. We are talking about some experience. It could be something which we wish for, or something which has happened, or that which we are undergoing. But we are talking, so that is where the stories are connected, because it's a story. The very fact that it's a story connected, the very fact that it's a lived experience, or could be one, it could be one, like science fiction. It could be one experience. I'm just imagining an experience which is not yet happening. That is the story.
Right.
That's why when I look at it as a, when somebody comes and tells me, you see, I am a spiritual but not religious. And so I am a nun, not N-U-N, but N-O-N-E, nun. So I say, oh, interesting story. Tell me your story. So then I don't say that, oh, you see, this is okay, but there should be religion and there is Vedanta or there is Islam or there is Christianity. I don't go into that. I say, oh, interesting. And so there is a book called Story of a Nun. So there is this young woman. She goes across religion and goes and experiences every religion, but she does not belong to any religion. She follows what is called spiritual but not religious. So that's a wonderful story. And effectively, she knows more about religion than any one religious person will.
That makes sense. Makes sense.
So suppose a filmmaker or a story writer is not, I think, so much of having obsession about what story they are saying. They just want to say, they just want to tell a good story. Right? A story which is absorbing, which is engaging. That's all they want. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're correct.
Because I don't know whether a filmmaker will say, you see, I want to tell a story. But then it is no more filmmaking, then it is propaganda. See storytelling all the place. No, in villages you go, there are the grandma or the people who are sitting over a cup of tea. Forget the political connotation, but over a cup of tea or some other beverage, they are telling some story, and people are engrossed. So there is no conflict. There is no conflict. But the moment you talk about philosophy, the moment you talk about theology, there will be conflict. And that is where we need to. Why should I make a theology of a story? Why should I make a philosophy of a story? The person was sitting and then on his head fell an apple. Good story. Bring science, confuse us completely. अब मुझे gravitational law पढ़ना है, integration पढ़ना है, differentiation. Why should I do all that? Story was very nice. See, that's what I'm saying. So the story itself and what engages us. So you write reviews of movies. So which movie would you love? A movie which is talking about some grand philosophy or a movie like Drishyam?
No, see, personally, I can relate to different things because what I genuinely feel is that all of us, we are not merely one person. All of us, we are multiple people in one body, and so personally, I can relate to a funny comedy film as well. If you're talking about movies, it can be totally nonsense and madcap and just keep your head at the home, and that sort of movie I can totally relate to it. I can enjoy it. I can relate to like a political film as well. I can relate to a historical film as well. I can relate to a like a like an autobiography as well. I can relate to a film which is philosophical in nature, maybe spiritual in nature as well. So it is as you spoke about the story. So the idea is the context can be anything. It is the way the story is told. So and it can be anything. So we can ideally we should not be fixated on only one sort of stories. Like we should be able to, if it is told interestingly, if it holds our attention, then we can relate to any. Like I've seen Drishyam as well. I love comedies as well, and I've liked Bahubali as well. At the same time, I've liked the Three Idiots too, and I've liked Mughal-e-Azam too, or Awara, or Umrao Jan, or like a Deewana of Rishi Kapoor, or Irfan Khan, still Talwar as you're saying, or Irfan Khan's. There's a movie called The Lunchbox, or Hasil. So Irfan Khan is part of this movie called the Lunchbox, which is one context. He's also part of this movie called Hasil, which is extremely like a violent film, a political violent film. He's part of Pan Singh Tomar as well, where he's playing a dacoit. So I think all of us, we are multiple people in one body, and we have the ability to have different viewpoints and thought processes, and we can switch. We can definitely switch from one to the other. And I think that also depends upon your intellectual capacity and the way you look at the world. You're talking about learning from different stories. So the idea is that if you are accepting of other people, of other cultures, other thought processes, then you can appreciate something completely. Like I like Thappad, for example. I've seen it twice. The second time around, I went with my family, with my wife. And at the same time, I saw this movie called Kabir Singh, and I liked it, which a lot of people
Which
feel
many
that it
people
is
would
something
not like.
which maybe, so I think a lot of people like because it did a huge business. But then there were some people who felt that maybe it was not right towards women, for example, that is. But I felt that you look at the character, he's having anger management issues. He's not
Yeah.
really against women. He has been conditioned in a certain manner, and basically he's having anger management issues, and his problems are stemming from that. And ultimately, he realizes his mistakes. He goes through a lot of turmoil and suffering as well, and maybe that is why that people are able to relate to it. So I can relate to, I can appreciate a Kabir Singh, I can appreciate a Thappad as well. i
Yeah.
I don't have to belong to either camp, that I belong to the Kabir Singh camp or I belong to the Thappad. I can appreciate both of them at separately. And I'm not being superficial about it. I genuinely can relate because both are different contexts.
Yeah.
We need to understand the stories in their context. The moment we look at the stories in their context, that is when we can do justice to the expression of opinions, because there are times when there are too many opinions and they're not well informed,
Yeah, exactly.
and they're coming out from a certain source where there is no information in the backdrop. Many people, they've not even seen something and still they have an opinion, and they add to the chaos and the noise. So I feel that we can be ultimately it has to be a well told story.
Exactly.
If it is a
It
well
has to
told
be
story,
engaging,
it
interesting.
can be, we I think we have this culture of oral tradition that the world has grown upon, that stories have been passed on from one person to the other, one generation to the other, and that has happened through the oral culture. And I think that's a very, very important part of any culture, and that has been present in, I think, a lot of civilizations. And I think in India it has been a very, very intrinsic part. The entire concept of Chopal and Chabutra, and the entire concept of villages and people coming together and telling stories, singing songs together, and sharing their thought process. And it's a mode of entertainment, but they're also passing on stories to generations, as you mentioned about the folklore part of it. So yeah, that's what I feel.
What I was saying was, see, everyone, as you rightly said, everyone is a story, and then the story changes, and we have so many stories. So it's not that we are one story. We have so many stories at different times. Different stories are changing, they are unfolding, etc. So if you go to YouTube, you will see there is a conversation between a philosopher called Noam Chomsky and Michel Foucault. Now, this is a very famous conversation which happened between them. If I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the late 60s. Now, that is, I'm a philosopher, I'm into philosophy, and I watched that many times, but I would rather watch a story, because that's not a story. What happens there is, in the beginning, both are great philosophers. Noam Chomsky is still alive, and Michel Foucault passed away. So, but they begin at the same point where they end. And one fellow is saying that what I'm saying is true, and the other fellow is saying what I'm saying is true.
Yeah.
The patience to, both are great people, and they are very, very great in brain, great intelligence. So they don't have any patience to listen to the other. So it's just a civilized quarrel. That's what is happening in front of so many people.
No, that's a good way of saying it. Even I've never been able to really relate to Noam Chomsky. Even I've been just listening to a lot about him. So I find that a lot of like intellectual snob. As you mentioned something very pertinent in the beginning about Swami Vivekananda, that his wisdom, his spirituality stemmed from his actual experiences, from the way he lived his life, the sort of experiences that he had, the misery that he faced, the wise people that he had company of, and the traveling that he did, and he met different people and acquired worldly wisdom. So basically, it was a conglomeration and a confluence of a lot of influences, but they were coming from his own personal experiences. And the moment you have this capacity to learn from your personal experiences, rather than adapting from say people around you, or like say people who are the great people, and we're supposed to follow them blindly. So that's the difference, I think, between great people and
Exactly.
people who are intelligent, but maybe they're not having that capacity to really become great individuals, because they're not really able to process their intelligence into wisdom, which is unique to their own thought process. Because the moment you come up with your own thought process based on your experiences, that's when I feel that you acquire wisdom, which is different from other people's intelligence.
So that's why many times Western philosophy is called armchair philosophy. That the Western philosophers
Exactly.
themselves call itself and that is why, as a reactionary response to this, came Marxism. Because Marxism felt that no, philosophy has to be grounded in real life. And then you have the branches of analytical philosophy and continental philosophy, where continental philosophy like existentialism, etc., they are grounded more in the lived experience. Because people are saying that you say that there is A and there is B, A is similar to B, B is not similar to A. All this we don't want. There is suffering. Now you give us some explanation. But there again, if a person says, I lived in a concentration camp and this is what I experienced, the boy in the striped pajama, something like that. That's the story I want to hear. I don't want to. So, the boy in the striped pajamas is a movie which will, what do you call it? It'll make you cry. So that is the story I want to hear.
No,
So
that's very well said.
ah, I would like to watch a story, Schindler's List. I understand, because one Schindler's List will tell you more about the World War II than so many tomes on World War II.
Absolutely.
So, see, uh, Aristotle very famously said that literature is at any time much greater than philosophy. So, you read one,
Of course.
there is Sharat Chandra's one small story. It is called Mohish in Bengali. It's about a buffalo with a soul. So that story is so moving. Now you may be belonging to PETA, you may do so much of animal activism. You will not get that, which you will get by reading that story. It moves you. So some years ago, in a literary festival, somebody asked me, Swamiji, you're a monk. Why do you read literature? I said, because I'm a monk. People have this idea. Monk means that person should be completely devoid of emotions, should have a face which is constipated, and should not have any feelings. That's a stupid thing. Because then how will I understand the human condition? I will not understand. If I don't understand human condition, if I don't understand human beings, how will I understand God? So that story we need to listen to. So wherever, and that is why. And when you listen to a story, acceptance automatically. And so this could be one way of looking at things. And that is why if you look at the Eastern traditions of religion, there was never this question of who is right and who is wrong. This never was the question. Nobody said, "Tum galat ho, you are wrong." That never happened. This right-wrong binary creates problem, because then we are denying the story. See, as they say, the proverb, the most often quoted proverb, sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. Now, if it is, then you cannot deny it because it's fact. ऐसा हुआ है. So though you may say मुझे अच्छा नहीं लग रहा, but हुआ है ना. It has happened. So it's my story. It has happened. Why are you denying it? So that then you relate. Like, oh, so what you can do with a story is that you can listen to it and you can absorb it and you can have some pathos for that story. That is where story works better than anything else.
Of course.
I would rather be a story and be many stories at the same time than be a philosopher, or because you see the best philosophers are sometimes best storytellers.
Of course.
If you take the case of Jean-Paul Sartre, he was a great storyteller. He used to write novels. If you Camus, all these people, they were also philosophers, they were also storytellers. So be a storyteller, because then your story reaches to more people, and it's again not a propaganda. People listen to your story. That's all you need. We are all so socially connected, but we have lost the art of listening. We have simply lost it. So, so if that we can do, we can just listen. I think it will also bring patience. It will bring a lot of sanity, and it will make us all live in a better world. That's why I think,
Of course.
because
Of course.
we are all putting, see, why is religion? Religion was a device used to bring happiness. But as they say, putting the cart before the horse. They say, nah, you have to follow religion, only then you will get happiness. No, it's not the
Right.
other way. If you seek happiness, then you have your own religion. That's what Swamiji said. I would like to see as many religions as there are people on this planet.
Of course. Of course.
So many religions. So if there are so many billion people, then there should be so many religions in the universe. Because it makes sense, there are so many stories. And every story is a religion, it's a philosophy, it's a dogma, doctrine, whatever it is.
Yeah. No, Swamiji, it was wonderful talking to you, and thank you so much for your time. It was really wonderful talking to you, and
I'm so delighted.
thank you so much. Sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.